Hi, I am currently a Lalafell. Savage and Ultimate rating offer some of the best gameplay in Final Fantasy XIV. They encourage you to learn new things about the game while also offering a fun sense of community with their perfectly sized 8-man parties. The devs put some of their best work at designing these harder fights and making them unique, and many veteran players sub exclusively for this stuff. However, if you're new to the game or rating itself, you might be quickly discouraged after signing up through the usual duty finder only to find out Avatar 2 is more likely to drop before the queue pops. Higher end content in Final Fantasy requires a few extra steps to get into. This can be discouraging, but I don't think it has to be. The first thing we should ask is, what is endgame content? For better or worse, the answer is very linear, and the game even makes a distinction in the duty finder. It also tells you what isn't: normal mode raids, normal trials, alliance raids, and expert dungeons. None of this content is intended to be prohibitively difficult. Fights and this overall level of content just aren't very punishing. There's rarely enrage timers, and they're meant to just be loot pinatas. We'll get back to that part later though. For now, let's just agree that, in quotes, real endgame content starts with extreme trials. These fights are introductions to higher difficulty stuff, and they can be thought of as Savage Light. If we were to draw up an FFXIV difficulty scale with 1 being the easiest content in the game and 10 being the hardest, X-Trials tend to clock in around a 6. Some are way harder or easier than others, but as a general rule, mechanical failure in X-Trials is personal. That means when you make a mistake or die, you'll be pretty lonely on the floor, and it will rarely wipe the entire party. Set mechanics also tend to be pretty generic, and while Square always throws in a wrench or two unique to each fight, you aren't going to come across insane puzzles or viciously tight DPS checks. The average experienced player will clear an X-Trial in just a session or two, but they teach you some raiding fundamentals and tend to be pretty fun. These fights typically reward an expansion-themed mount and a pre-raid BIS weapon, with the exception of the occasional trial giving pre-raid BIS accessories instead. In either case, the game essentially puts neon arrows around this content saying, start here. If you enjoy clearing your first X, you'll probably enjoy what's to come. Once you have your gear from the X-Trial and feel comfortable with the sort of difficulty that fight offers, you can move up the content ladder to Savage. Savage itself is not really a useful linear descriptor of difficulty. Using that 1 to 10 scale, Savages can range anywhere from a 6.5 to a 9.5. Beyond a general bump in boss health, incoming damage, and difficulty, the most noticeable difference between X and Savage is that personal failure tends to lead to group failure, especially in the 3rd and 4th fights in a tier. Just one person getting a mechanic wrong or dying can either outright fail the group or start a chain of other failures which inevitably results in a wipe. However, these mechanics, while harder than what you see in an X, tend to be fight-defining and well spaced out. You can think of them as sort of like unofficial checkpoints where once you've progged past one, you should reliably be able to clear it and work on the next. Frankly, Savage has a lot of downtime. Speaking as a healer main here, there are maybe 3 to 4 moments in every Savage fight where big defensive cooldowns are actually needed. While Square seems to be adding more and more of these into Endwalker, it's still not exactly backbreaking. Savage is difficult, but they give you time to catch your breath in between the sprints. These fights typically reward the best gear in the game, and for glamour purposes, offer dyeable versions of the story mode stuff. The last fights in a tier, that is the 4th, 8th, and 12th fights of an expansion set, also drop mounts. And this is probably the stopping point for a lot of people who just want to raid casually. You can pretty much get your BIS, get your dyeable armor, get a mount, and then go off to the gold saucer and race chocobos until the next tier. However, if you're willing to dedicate considerably more time, we have Ultimates. Remember when I said the endgame content cycle was a little linear and stale? Ultimates were Square's last major addition to raiding, and they were added in 2017. Pandemic issues and delays also mean we only got 1 in all of Shadowbringers, but Square claims they aim to release 2 every X-Pack. In any case, these fights are Savage Plus, featuring several boss fights chained back to back to back. A clear can take anywhere from 12 to 20 minutes depending on the fight and your group's DPS, and progging can take months for your average raider. Ultimates technically reward BIS weapons for the tiers they come out in, but people care much less about that and more about the fact they're anime glow sticks. They also give titles. Anyone you've seen wearing a variant of the X Legend got it from clearing an Ultimate, and they also give you some adventure plate options too. And lastly, unique to Ultimates, they cannot be done unsynced. You must do them with a full group of 8, synced down to the level and item level of whatever patch and X-Pack the fight was released in. This is supposed to keep Ultimate difficulty static across X-Packs and eras and make sure all clears are as legitimate as others, but debating the success or failure of that idea is a whole other topic. Alright, that's the roadmap laid out. X-Trials to Savages to Ultimates, but we also need to talk about actually getting into these instances, who to play with, and how to gear. Unlocking content in this game is simple. Only Ultimates really have a serious prerequisite, which is to clear the last boss of the Savage tier they released with. For the Epic of Alexander, you had to clear E4S. For Dragonsong, P4S. You get the gist. So now let's talk about the two broad types of groups that you can do this content with: Statics and PF, or Party Finder. PF offers raid groups to people who think commitment is a slur. It's right here in this menu and offers you on-the-spot pugs for any content you can imagine at any time of day. This includes X-Trials and Savages, and depending on the raiding culture of your data center, maybe some of the Ultimates, especially older ones with agreed-upon strats and trivial DPS checks. Regardless, it's the exact mixed bag it sounds like. Sometimes you'll get a great group and some smooth clears, sometimes nightmare fuel. The other option is the exact opposite. Statics, as the name implies, are unchanging, scheduled groups of 8 who meet every week. This is your traditional raid team model. Under the umbrella of static, you'll find everything from casual groups to world-first raiders. The three typical terms you'll see to distinguish these groups are casual, mid-core, and hardcore. A hardcore group might raid for 12 or more hours a week and expect you to have a history of raiding. Casual groups, on the other hand, might have totally fresh players with only 1 or 2 vets to offer a guiding hand and have a much lighter schedule. Mid-core means nothing. It's just a catch-all term for groups that are neither super hardcore nor super casual, and you can get just about anything in this bag, including groups that are definitely casual or definitely hardcore. But really, there are so many statics out there, you can pretty much find anything you're looking for. Discords like XIV Recruiter have plenty of groups that are looking for other beginners, presumably like yourself. It may sound intimidating to join a group of 7 strangers, but in my experience, you're likely to meet some really fun and funny people, and there's definitely something to be said about consistency here. While PF might have you learning new strats and positions with every new group, you get more structure out of a static. If you've joined a static and it's not going well or you're not getting along with everyone, you can just drop out and find another. You're not signing your life away to these people, it's just a more structured alternative to the chaos of Party Finder. Before you can do any of this, you'll need gear, consumables, and some basic grasp of your job's endgame gameplay. I've saved this for last because truthfully it's not very exciting or difficult. For gear, pre-raid BIS exists in mainly 2 forms: casual content gear and crafted gear. Calling back to that Loot Pinata comment I made earlier, story mode and alliance raids offer decent item levels for their difficulty and are attainable by just queuing up through the Party Finder. Though note that alliance raids won't always have competitive item level gear depending on where we're at in the patch cycle. Crafted gear is a little trickier. Technically, all raids are clearable in this stuff, but that's in the context of the world's best players with full pentamounts, and even then, DPS checks are usually quite narrow. This is not a realistic expectation for your average person. If you have the guild to spare, it can be worth to pick up a few pieces of crafted gear, though always make sure it's high quality, denoted by these sparkles. But as for pentamelding, you'll have to make the decision whether or not the money is worth spending, depending on your seriousness, where we're at in the patch cycle, and the depth of your wallet. You can get away with even just buying the gear and only using the 2 meld slots on it, really. But again, this stuff is pretty easily replaced anyway. Now, to clarify, the 2 free meld slots in every piece of gear should be filled out. These melds add up to a whole extra item's worth of stats. You can find a BIS sheet for your job in the Balance Discord's various job channels, and these will show you the exact melds you're looking for. Coincidentally, these BIS sheets also show us the actual gear you should be shooting for, your BIS. And a surprise to hopefully no one, raid BIS comes from, wait for it, raids. There are always 2 sets to mix and match. The first, obviously, is the tier gear itself. Every raid boss drops certain gear coffers. The first boss will always and only drop accessories. The second, minor gear pieces like hats, hands, and shoes. The third, those minor pieces plus legs. And the fourth, chest and weapons. Once per week, you'll get a participation token in the form of a book that can then be used to buy this same gear from a raid vendor in the PvE vendor capital of the X-Pack. An Endwalker, that's Radzat Han. The other set is Tome Gear, which can technically be obtained in casual content, but only in its unupgraded form. Even so, right off the vendor, this stuff is usually better than anything obtained from crafting or casual content, but for most of a tier's duration, you can only get the actual augmented versions from the upgrade materials dropped in raids, which I skipped over talking about in the boss drops. These are brines, twines, and shines. They make your Tome Gear equivalent in stat power to raid drops, but with different substats, hence the mixing and matching. Now, I said this is true for most of the cycle, because once a raid tier is close to being irrelevant, they also allow you to buy these upgrade materials with currency obtained from alliance raids. This technically means you could wear a full set of max eye level gear, albeit with poorly optimized substats, without ever stepping into Savage content. But my question is this: why? The fun of it isn't gearing up, it's in doing the content when it's relevant and still kind of difficult. Anyway, I'm soapboxing. The only other thing you really need to worry about is consumables. Unlike old school WoW where you needed to bring the entire pantry, Final Fantasy only has 2 things you're expected to bring: food and pots. Food is more or less non-negotiable. Again, that same BIS sheet from the Balance will show you what food is good for your gear set, and like crafted gear, make sure it's high quality for the best benefits. The extra max health you get from a food buff alone makes it almost mandatory for learning a fight, especially when you're a little light on gear. You don't want to be dying to simple raid-wide damage because your stomach is empty. Pots, on the other hand, are a little different. The most common etiquette around these is to start potting once your group has seen Enrage. All endgame bosses in Final Fantasy are on a timer. If you fail to kill the boss before that timer's up, you die, and it is very common to see Enrage when the boss has only 1 or 2% health left. Pots can get you over this line, but if you're drinking them when your group is consistently wiping at 80% boss health, you're just wasting your gil. Now, I also mentioned something about knowing how to play your job. This is kind of outside the scope of this video and is best figured out either through the balance or job-specific guides out here on YouTube, but if you're looking for entry-level endgame optimization instead, check out my video that goes over gameplay tips for new raiders here. Thank you, bye.